Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pam Goldberg. I lead the Equity and Innovation Marketing for Mondelez for Asia Pacific, Middle East, and Africa, based here in Singapore.
Yeah, we're going to just have to share.
Hi, my name is Stephen Yu. So I'm actually the program manager for Microsoft Asia Pacific. My portfolio manages a lot of startup programs and also partner engagement in the Southeast Asia region.
I'm Nicky. I'm working for Medtronic, and I'm the APAC lead for digital innovation. So for those who don't know Medtronic, actually we are a medtech company. While the devices are being developed in the US, the digital innovation is actually run in APAC.
Hi, I'm Richa, and I wear two hats. The daytime job is Chief Digital and Innovation Officer for Asia Pacific for Johnson & Johnson. And I also globally am the Chief Creative Content and Digital Officer for J&J, so I do two jobs.
Thanks, guys. So before we go into a bit more detail about what actually innovation looks like in these businesses and best practice examples, I'd like to just ask you all a really general question about, because we've got a real mix of sectors, we've got a real mix of experience as well, and also in terms of geographies of where you've all worked. So it would be great to understand, just referring back to the question that Tom was framing around Asia as the innovation hub of the world. You know, what's your take on why Asia is sort of at the forefront of what innovation looks like in the world?
So I can start. So I work for Mondelez in the snacking industry. And when it comes to snacking behavior, I mean, for me, Asian consumers, more than anywhere else in the world, have a openness and a willingness to experiment and try new things. And we see that, just by the sheer choice that consumers have here, and the willingness to go online and purchase something from anywhere in the world. So for us, the challenge is continuing to keep up with the pace, and step outside our comfort zone as well as a company, and also take that willingness to experiment.
Well, for me, I have quite a rich working experience in the past. So I actually been involved with the startup community and the developer community in Singapore for over 10 years, and I've seen its evolution from entrepreneurs saying that, hey, I have an idea, to right now is I have an idea, I have partners, I have customers, and I'm ready to scale right now. And I guess Asia is the hub of innovation because of the hunger of the population here, the supply and demand that is available here, and the opportunities here. Just looking at opportunities in Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, and that is a multi-billion-dollar business that a lot of business owners in US, in Europe, in China are trying to tap into. And every single day, I'm getting a lot of inquiries for partnerships, for organizations, for startups, all trying to move into Singapore as the launching pad for innovation within the region. So definitely, Asia is definitely the major innovation hub right now in the world.
So for us, I guess when I think of Asia, I think of an amazing region, right? So it's got over 60% of the millennials sit in Asia. It's got the richest of markets, the poorest of markets. You've got the 2G bandwidth, you've got 4G bandwidth, you've got new retail in China, you've got India about to happen on e-commerce. So when I look at the space that we're in, everything from moms for Johnson's Baby to beauty with Neutrogena to FemCare but Stay Free, just the products that we're in, we can't but help be innovative because our consumer needs are so diverse. And I think that the day and the age of one size fits all is gone. It really is about one size fits one. So I think we just have no option but to be disrupted and be disruptive.
Well, I would say that Asia is probably the only region having a double-digit growth. So where there's growth, there's funding, and that's what's driving innovation. In the past, long ago, where it's all about insights, creating new value. Back in those days when I was working in Philips, consumer electronics, I tell people that my job is to create land waste. You find a value proposition, you create a great idea, people buy it, 2 years down the road, they chuck it away. But after a while, you realize that over the years, the idea is no longer substantial on its own, but the real value behind it. And what's driving this value is relevant to how much money it's actually bringing for the business, because as much as social innovation is involved, being innovation in an organization, the impact to the business is probably the bottom line. And with that as a mindset, that is probably what will actually drive innovation within every organization.
So whilst you've still got the mic, Nicky, I'm going to ask you, within Medtronic and within other examples of businesses that you've worked in, what do you think are the most important ingredients? Because we've talked a lot today around how innovation can be the enemy of operational excellence. And what, from your experience, do you think is necessary to make it work?
Okay, so when I joined Medtronic probably about 1.5 years ago, my background was actually consumer electronics. Healthcare is totally a different domain or industry altogether. But it wasn't too long that I realized we need a lot of our customers or our patients today are in emerging markets. And emerging markets are the businesses, are the markets that has no additional cash to pay for superfluous innovation or fancy stuff. So we went on a trip together, do a pre-sales with one of our business group. We sell, it was a restorative therapy group. We sell, our bone structures, the metal bits for all the surgical. And upon reaching the initial ethnography study, we found that the hospital is actually a tier 2, tier 3 hospital. Their IT administrator is literally an IT guy with anything with a laptop. Anything about cloud computing, anything fancy, they are not at that level yet. So the challenge suddenly became, what is the real value that digitization can bring for this hospital chain? And with that as a mindset, we started exploring the business unit. Okay, today, we don't have analytics. We don't even know if they're following compliance being compliant in their patient protocol. So we suddenly identified, okay, if we have a way we want analytics to measure our sales, to measure the product mix, and how can this actually help improve the compliance for the hospital? So it's as simple as a low tech, we don't think too fancy, and we are developing right now just from a surgical viewpoint, because there's a lot of other elements, patient medical records and building and all the infrastructure. We don't want to tap into other systems, but to make a very small proof point that we need to create, just pick the surgical phase. And with that, how do we measure compliance from a pen and paper today that they're doing? As I think what was mentioned earlier, there was not about changing behavior, but about mirroring behavior. So we took whatever they have on the pen and paper, and we created a hybrid solution, digitizing, kind of like a digital checklist, after which they can print it out. So it's not a very fancy, high-cost development, but through the understanding the requirements and working closely with the business on this, that's where they need to get their initial pre-sales buy-in. And once we have this whole mock-up on this proof of concept to measure the entire compliance and the hospital finds useful, we start the actual cost in the development. So a lot of our innovation projects are working closely with the businesses and to go through design thinking process or go through rapid prototyping process to bring this, to identify this actual value that the business requires.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of how incremental innovation can, and having that user-centered approach can immediately create impact. And it often is the case that within organizations you have to gain the trust and garner the results of those incremental innovations to give you that space to play in a more disruptive way. Pam, in terms of Mondelez, how do you find, what ingredients are necessary to really start delivering innovation in your business?
Working at Mondelez, we have a lot of really big global brands, Oreo being our biggest one in the biscuit category, which hopefully you all know and enjoy on a very frequent basis. But what's important for us is not just to launch global innovations that have worked in North America or Europe, but to really embrace a culture of small experiments And we at Mondelez have a process by which we empower our marketing and R&D colleagues in small teams, more junior people in our organization, to be entrepreneurs, to take 3 months, 4 months, develop, mine consumer insights, develop concepts and prototypes, and at the end of the day, present those to senior management. And having worked on those totally independent, right? They're not following any big process. They're not meeting with senior leaders to get their buy-in and sign off. They're working completely on their own. And so they're really very deeply connected to the consumer in their particular market. And at the end of the day, they present those back, and we agree to put some of those small experiments and exciting ideas in the pipeline, fund them, and support them and launch them. And I think that's really important for us at Mondelez, in keeping with the pace and the speed that we've discussed, right, that we see here in Asia. And I think it's a great process, especially for large companies, to be able to balance some of the big brands, big processes that we live with.
And Richa, I know J&J are doing quite a bit in that space as well.
So I think when I think of core ingredients, right, the first thing I would call out is mindset. And I think it was yesterday I was prepping for a deck for our chairman, and there was a proverb, a Chinese proverb I saw. It says, when the winds of change blow, some people, I don't know if you guys have heard this, some people build walls and others build windmills. And I think that is so true, because there's never going to be the right time, the right amount of money, the right amount of people to drive change and to be innovative. So when I think of my own journey, having been in the company for 2 years, we didn't have any of that, but I knew we had to drive change. So it really was about going out there, meeting startups, bringing them in, and showing impact. And I think that the critical thing is A, mindset. B, there has to be a fit in the DNA and the values that these startups have with what makes you as a company. So it's just not really innovation for the sake of innovation and bringing any startup on board. And that was really critical for the credo that we have and we live by. And then the third thing is, once you've articulated the vision, I think then it's about being able to, then it's much easier to get the buy-in. And today I've got Jess sitting there, and she heads innovation on our team, and it's all come together. So I think it's mindset, it's having the vision, and it's being hungry, because you just have to go out and do it. Yeah. It's just what I feel. So that's how it all came together, I guess, for us.
Yeah, I think somebody said to me once, they said it's 90% people, 10% strategy. It's having that clarity of where, and it was mentioned earlier in the Google session this morning around shared vision. And I think the other interesting point they made, they were talking about culture, and they were saying, it's not about taking a Google interior of a building and putting it in your business, because that's not necessarily the right thing for your business. It might not reflect your culture. So it's got to be that fit. So Stephen, in terms of Microsoft.
Yeah, in terms of Microsoft, I have to echo everybody's view that I think having a top leadership vision about embracing change and innovation is very important, because when our CEO Satya actually came on board in Microsoft, it was sort of like in a stage whereby the company was a mammoth technology company that is at the crossroads of, does it continue where it is from, or does it try to venture down a new path? And our CEO actually thought that for the good of the company, we have to change. We have to embrace change and embrace innovation. And he actually set out on the path of setting up the vision, hiring leadership team members that actually subscribe to his vision, and getting the leadership team members to actually hire the second level, third level of people that actually subscribe to that mission and be able to actually create that culture and also be able to maintain it. Microsoft is always talking about digital transformation with its partners, with its customers, and we actually eat our own medicine. We are constantly still on a path of digital transformation, and I'm sure that a lot of people know that Microsoft actually underwent restructuring around July, and we are still in the midst of change. And I think having that entrepreneurial mindset in every one of us is actually really important, and especially for my role, because I maintain so much initiatives and startups programs out in the market. And there's always a running joke whereby whenever we have an APAC meeting with everybody, whenever our leadership team members come out on stage, they will say, why are so many of you right here in this room? My expectation is all of you guys are out there talking on the ground with partners and customers and to find out what do they really need and how can we help them. And that is the type of leadership thinking that actually makes Microsoft one of the most innovative companies in the world.
Thank you. So I think we've talked a bit about how important the role of leadership is, and in terms of that top-down approach. How do you? Because one of the challenges is obviously within the mindset, recruiting the right talent and bringing the right people on board. So how from your experiences, how do you find how do you best recruit and then develop talent? Richa, can you kick us off with that?
I think it's giving people the permission to fail. Again, when I look at our credo, and I'll go on, so you've got to humor me about our credo, is that we do talk about failure is acceptable and mistakes should be made and should be paid for. And that's okay. And I always say it's not about failing fast, it's about failing smart. And if you failed and you can tell me what you learned from that, that's okay. And I think therein comes in where I think leadership has to play a critical role. So I always, we have a healthy mix of people that have been entrepreneurs when we hire. I have the bias. I was a banker who then became an entrepreneur before joining J&J. So I think having people that come from different backgrounds, where you've got diversity of experience and thought, is a great hotbed for innovation anyway. And then if you add that on with the permission to fail and do that smartly, I think it's okay. So the critical thing, I think, is giving people the opportunity to stay on top of the game and learn and just keep doing stuff. And I think for leaders to try and get the bureaucracy out of the way, that's what I would say.
So when I think about recruiting people for my team, one of the main skills that I look for is curiosity. So, intellectual curiosity about the world and the people around them. And, oftentimes that comes from a lot of diversity of experience. And, it's key for me as I'm meeting people and interacting with them, do I see that in the questions that they ask? Are they elegant questions? Are they really thinking outside the box? And for me, beyond, ticking the box on certain types of jobs or experiences, that's even more important.
Yeah.
I look for cowboys. and
cowgirls.
Sorry.
Thank you. Yes.
Mainly, the most important thing I realize in big organization is there's a lot of indecisiveness and ambiguity. And I always tell people that democracy doesn't work in organization. And most of the time, is given this uncertain nature where the cowboys actually do something and they facilitate the process faster. So when this ambiguous, nobody wants to make a decision. If you make the decision, you claim the first flag, right? At least we are one step ahead of before. So that's the first thing if I were to look for, right? And then, of course, the second one would be really more the business mindset. Every dollar placed in is every dollar counts. And I feel that if this individual has a way to know how to generate money to justify for his own time or his investment into this innovation, at some point, the business will find it relevant as well because it's generating commercial interest. And that, I think the traction will automatically come by. So, yeah.
For my team, especially for Microsoft, whenever we're actually looking for candidates, we actually look for people that we know within our communities because by human nature, we tend to gravitate towards people that are similar to us or subscribe to certain same values as us. And through that, we are actually able to actually identify a lot of great talents that is always lurking within our developer communities, our student communities, or within startup founders as well. A great example is myself, actually. I actually started out engaging with Microsoft to actually help them as a developer with their developer communities more than 10 years ago. And throughout the years, they have always tried to offer me a job, but I have always been employed somewhere. And recently, 2 years ago, when the job opportunity came and I was available, they quickly grabbed me. And currently, my team is on a hiring spree, and we are also looking for people within our own communities, and we have identified great talents through that. But definitely, one of the key criteria, except for, of course, academic and also job experiences, is definitely we're looking for people with really have demonstrated really entrepreneurial mindset. They have demonstrated they are constantly embracing change, and they are always open to new ideas, and they are also willing to share feedback. That's why in my team, we always say that feedback is a gift, and we are always willing to accept any gifts.
We've actually done a bit of a U-turn in terms of our recruitment. So we've stopped trying to recruit people that we know, because otherwise we have a team which are almost, too similar in their approach, and actually diversity is so key. And that wealth of experience, I think, and bringing different perspectives being so important. And I think actually that's also incredibly important in terms of internally and within large organizations and diversity in teams. And we were talking earlier, weren't we, Pam, about, the challenges there's been historically between R&D departments and marketing departments. And I think, we're seeing slightly different approaches to some of those challenges now. Could you share some examples of, how that's working in your business and how that's being encouraged?
Yeah, I mean, at Mondelez, R&D and marketing work hand in hand. I mean, in fact, so much so that we've modified the name of our global RDQ organization to RDQI, and the I standing for innovation, right? It's embedded in all of the functions. And, as I was mentioning earlier, we work very closely as a marketing and R&D organization on small experiments and innovation. And, oftentimes, whether we're going and speaking with consumers or whether we're in an internal meeting, it might be the R&D lead that is sharing the background of the insight and the strategy versus the marketer. I mean, it's really absolutely hand in hand, and we have an amazing infrastructure now and RDQ hubs around the world, 9 global innovation hubs. Our biscuit one is in Suzhou, China, and it's amazing to see what we developed from there. I think one of the amazing things that we've done is we launched a brand called Belvita, which is a breakfast brand. It exists globally, but we modified it and developed it and launched it in China specific to Chinese consumer tastes, and that was really driven hand in hand by our marketing and RDQ organization.
So in terms of the diversity and the skill set, now, we touched on earlier, Stephen, you've got a huge amount of experience within incubators and startups. So how do you think that works with, when they're working alongside or on whichever level with big organizations?
I mean, in terms of Microsoft, we actually, since about 2008-09, we actually have launched startup programs to actually work very closely with startups. And all around the world, there actually have people like me on the ground working directly with startups. And our program is called the Microsoft for Startups program. And we basically actually work very closely with the startups to actually provide them with technology access, but also to figure out how could Microsoft technologies be embedded into their products and services to actually help them to launch and improve their products and services. But during those engagements, we also do take feedback from them, and whenever they actually have feedback for us, we actually circulate right back to our R&D and engineering department, and also try to figure out how to make improvements to our own products as well. And I guess it is always a virtuous cycle of innovation and feedback between Microsoft and also our partners and the startups that we actually are actively working with.
And we touched earlier, didn't we, Richa, when we were talking around how, because obviously there's a big challenge of how startups work within larger organisations, but also when businesses are acquired, how that is. we've heard, in Europe, for example, there's a large trend where I think it's globally now, but of management consultancies buying into sort of the design thinking principles and buying. Accenture, for example, bought 50 design businesses last year. How do you integrate 50 businesses into a management consultancy without missing a beat? So, how does that work in terms of the businesses that J&J have acquired?
Yeah, so we've, a year or so ago, globally bought a company called OGX. I don't know if you guys have used their shampoo products, but they're absolutely gorgeous. And we bought it from Vogue, and they're based out of
There's
Florida.
some good plugs going down today, the products.
They really are good. Okay, so, and we bought them from Vogue, and they're based in Florida, and they're a very small company, and they run completely differently. So one of the most talented senior leader from J&J has gone there, but the management stays, and everything that the way they've done is stayed. So for example, when I look at social media, they've got a content studio. So I would normally, for my bigger brands, have an AOR that I would work with to get content created, but they have a green room, and that's where and because they do all this stuff on Instagram, that's where they shoot their products, and it goes out. So that DNA has stayed. We bought a Japanese brand, Dr. Shilabo, and again, they're into derma products. They're part of the organization, but we've kept the team the way it is. So they have the same access to the capabilities and platforms that the parent company has. So the Facebooks and the Googles and the Amazons and the Snapchats, whatever partnerships we have, they can access that. But the way decisions are made are much more leaner, the flatter organization. So we call it the pizza box management. So if you could have people that can sit around a pizza box, a max of 6 to 8 people, then they've been given the authority to go out and make decisions, and they just get stuff done. So that's how we've just let them go really fast, because I'll be honest with you, our lunch is just not being eaten by the big boys, right? The P&Gs and the Unilevers. My lunch is being eaten by small startups. So I can't afford to just keep an eye out on the big boys and assume it's going to be okay. We have to bring in that way of thinking, bring in these startups and let them be to teach us as well. So we learn a lot. And I see Johnson's Baby, which is a 135-year-old brand, learns and does things differently because of that interaction. So there's duality in the way we exist, but somehow it works.
Do you think it's around sort of their attitude to risk? Because there's, when you are a startup, risk is not the factor that it is when you're dealing with a 135-year brand and the heritage that goes with that. So I was going to ask you in terms of, what you learn from those businesses as well. Do you think some of that attitude to risk rubs off?
It does, and I think the biggest difference when I think of it is the intimacy that these brands have with the consumers. We all start with purpose. I think every brand in the room has started with purpose, but somewhere when you're a 140-year-old, somewhere that may have gotten lost in the way it's communicated to the consumer, right? But when you're a startup, you're very purposeful. And I think what I learned most is just trying to bring back being purpose-inspired in the way our bigger brands show up and in the stories we tell. Because, somewhere we've just gotten so science-backed. So I think, yes, we give them the comfort that they can go out and try, and if fail, it's okay. But we learn from them agility. We try and learn about purpose once again. And so I think it's a great combination, actually.
It feels almost we're a cyclical approach. Storytelling goes back to our roots, as a civilization. We were telling stories before we could write. And those were passed down through generations, and the sort of return to almost the basics and the truth of purpose and storytelling that we're seeing now, and how that fits with the with the sort of Gen Z and millennials that are coming, who want to be able to identify with that brand, and as their power grows, I think the role of purpose and storytelling will as well. And we're seeing this used now really successfully within consumer brands. I think it'll be interesting to understand as we see, within medical companies, Nicky, we see more of a focus or a blurring of the edges in terms of the consumerization of healthcare, how some of those elements start playing a role in medical. Have you seen any examples of that yet?
For startups to come into, Actually, we do have, okay, so for us, the diabetes division is a lot of B2C, so there's actually a lot of startups in there, in that field for monitoring the exercise and stuff. So we have, okay, the barriers to entry into the medical is slightly higher, stiffer, and so actually I've only witnessed once. The solution was good, but after the acquisition, we had to tear down everything to ground zero and redevelop the solution based on our requirements, partly because whether to spend the money for the security and compliance versus if we were to rebuild from beginning. So that was also a business decision. So I wouldn't say that we can integrate startups that smoothly into based on the truth is a patient record loss as a breach, and that affects the whole company name. So we are very critical on data like this. Yeah.
I think we're seeing this shift, with more, as we move more from healthcare into self-care and preventative trends that we're seeing around how, everyone is so much more conscious of their health, and as we are an aging population, the impact of that. And I think the piece around the purpose that we're seeing actually really does transpose quite nicely into that space for medical companies. So it'll be a really interesting space to see actually as to how that starts to play out. But particularly within, having to work that within ISO 13485 or FDA regulatory processes is a real challenge. But I think I just wanted to touch on really around, and we've talked around some of this, but we've talked a lot about users and consumers and our patients and what that means and how we have to be in close contact and understand the nuances between all the markets that we're working within. But how do you stay ahead of the competition in that sense, and how do you stay relevant? Is it more around sort of foresight or insight-led studies, or is it more around technology and the role that plays? Who'd like to take that? Pam.
I can start. I mean, I think one of the things what we're doing in our China business is, instead of being afraid of the young startups and the competition, or thinking about strategies of how to combat them, is actually shifting that and embracing them. So as I mentioned before, we have a brand in China called Belvita. It's a breakfast brand. And there's a company called Three Squirrels, which is a huge e-commerce company, multiple $100 million business, selling fresh nuts, very, very nutritious, very much on trend for the Chinese consumer. And so one would think they'd actually be one of our competitors, but instead we developed a partnership with them. We're now sourcing their ingredients for our products, and they're selling our brand on their site. So I think it's a great example of a unique way that we can embrace the startup culture, and that we can, similarly make sure we're staying on top of what consumers are looking for, because, oftentimes those young startups really know they're very, very close to the consumer. So let's take that and let's leverage that instead of fighting it.
Yeah, that's great. Richa, something you'd like to add? Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting question. I was just thinking about that, because I think for us there's a combination. I mean, when I think of one of our oldest products is Johnson's Top to Toe. And the reason it came about was there was the insight that little children up till 9 months, they don't have a blink reflex that's formed. So as a result, you don't want shampoo to be going into their little eyes and hurting them, right? So a lot of the products that came because of understanding the consumer and trying to solve for a pain point, which I think is important. For the job that I do, which is innovation from a marketing standpoint, I think there's a lot of information out there. It's how fast you can take that and explore it and do something with that. So when I think of it, for example, Neutrogena is always sold in a jar, but then we realized there was a whole trend towards tech. So we've actually got a tiger mask now, which you put on and releases collagen. So we've disrupted ourselves to be relevant. I'll give you another simple example, could be looking at search trends. So we've got Google as a key partner. And if I look at what teens were searching in India, there was a lot of searches around rose water. and honey. And so and that was really about how could they keep the skin supple yet use something which was natural. And that gave birth to natural energy, which is one of our product lines. So there are partners, there are ways that you get the data. I think it's how can you bring that in quickly, trial it out, see if it works, fails fine, if not, great, you've got a new product. So it's listening, it's being out there. I learned by being in events like this, hearing other people speak, meeting startups. So there's just a lot of, I wish there was one way. I think there's just a lot that comes out at you, but the key thing is what do you do with all of that?
Yeah.
And I think as long as you can take that and do something and move really fast, it's great. If not, it's just like deer in the headlights, or like, oh my God, what do I do with all of this? So.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a few minutes left. So sorry, Nicky, do you want to?
Well, if I may add,
Yeah.
I think for Medtronic, we believe in value-based healthcare. So it's a cost and outcome measurement, but not necessarily the outcome for the patient means they pay more. It could be about reducing the amount of time they need to be admitted to a hospital. Or it could be about increasing awareness so that even before they get a kidney disease on stage 5, at least in stage 2, they start understanding where they are and they will provide this access. So with this understanding of different stages allow us to identify where the different digital opportunities that we can provide to the patients to either self-manage or not to manage, but to create a self-awareness to at least they bring up the standard of care of the country to a certain level. So that's how we've been doing it.